I'm Justin. Some of you may not know me. How many people were here for the last time I did this seminar? The Dropshot Panfish one last October. Oh buddy, uh-oh. I was hoping for a lot of questions. I mean, you were here, weren't you?
No, you came in the store last October. I didn't know you guys weren't.
Alrighty. That's not weird. Alrighty. How many of you bass fish in here? Have you drop shotted for bass yet? A couple yeses.
Inadvertently.
Inadvertently? Okay. Well, give you a little back history on the drop shot. The drop shot supposedly originated out of Japan for fishing deep reservoir largemouth that they have out there thanks to us. And it was a way for them to target fish in really deep, clear water. Mainly because their water temp's usually a bit cooler than we got here, but they have a pretty similar climate to us. So they have the winter, they have the spring, and summer and fall. So, but it worked really well there. Guys from the West Coast kind of picked up on it. There's a lot of Japanese fishermen that moved to the west side of the country, and it's kind of trickled through the tournament series. And it's now pretty much a staple for anybody fishing spotted bass and smallmouth throughout the country now, and on certain lakes for largemouth as well. It's a pretty simple rig. It's a hook and a weight. Just about any other fishing rig we do. But what's interesting about it is that we're actually tying the hook in line, and then we're suspending the weight down below. And the weight that they use is actually specially designed. It's got a little opening that you thread the line through, and once it's through, you pull it from both sides, and it actually grasps and holds on to it, kind of like a clothespin. And the whole idea behind these weights is so if it ever gets hung up in the bottom, it can be easily pulled free, and you get your bait back. The reason they wanted to do that is a lot of these guys were making very, very high quality plastics, and you're talking $1, not counting the hook if it all breaks and comes out. You know, if you can get the weight free, usually the hook's free too. So you're not breaking the knot there. That's what they went to. Over the years, some specialty hooks have come out. I know when I first started doing it, it was octopus hooks, which I'll use a lot for crawler harness tying. But now they've gotten to the point where the hooks are set up so they actually have a slight bend in the eye, and it lets the hook actually sit, when it's in the water, it'll be almost straight out, but maybe a touch down, and it lets that gap be open, which helps with hookup percentage. And when you're fishing the plastics, it doesn't matter what shape it is, how big it is, the idea is just to nose hook it and leave as much of the plastic hanging out off the hook as possible. Now this is a finesse presentation. There is something called power shotting, which is for fishing in heavy weeds. It's not that common anymore. When this first got popular, guys were doing it. Some guys still do it in some shape or form, but when you rig the plastics on there, you're just going to take it and go onto the nose and then straight out, and just let the bait sit like that. When you fish this, generally this is a vertical presentation for deep water, but since we're Americans, we never do it the right way ever, according to them. One way I like to fish these are actually around docks and pilings and break walls. I'll pitch it up onto the break wall, let it fall straight down the break wall, and then let the line go tight. And then I'll just slowly work it down the dock towards me. And what happens is that bait stays at a constant level going right across that, but in a slow presentation. Crappie, bluegill, a lot of these larger panfish, they're pretty selective. There is times they'll hit baits that are moving really quick, but a lot of times you got to kind of sit in front of their face for a little bit longer and give them as much of a lifelike action as possible. And a drop shot rig does that probably the best out of any rigging like this you can do with plastics. The key to make this work for you when you cast out is you're not hopping this weight back. It's literally sitting on the bottom at all times, and you're trying to impart as just enough action that the weight stays attached to the bottom, but the bait's moving. So what you're doing is you're imparting slack into the line and then snapping it out. And that's what makes that bait undulate and move. But if you keep the weight connected to the bottom, you'll have really good success with this. When you start lifting it too much, that's when it starts to not work so well for a lot of people. There is times that works. There is no set laws and rules in fishing because the fish do what they're going to do. But 9 times out of 10, if you keep that weight connected to the bottom, you're going to catch more fish with a drop shot. Doesn't matter if it's bass, bluegill, crappie. It really doesn't matter the species. It works for everything. We even caught carp on a drop shot, actually. Another key part to this whole system, the reason I call it a system is because this is one of the few techniques that the proper rod can make or break it. When I first started doing this for panfish, there really wasn't a rod designed around this type of technique. Generally, you need a really fast tip, like an extra fast. If you look at the bass drop shot rods, they have a very large butt section, but they taper really quick to a really fine tip. And what that allows is that when you're jigging the bait, the tip gives, okay? And that helps keep that weight attached to the bottom. And you also need a very sensitive rod for this. Generally, your bites, they're just going to come in and hold it. They're not going to come up and take off running with it. So you're just going to feel something change. The weight will change. Sometimes you'll feel a tap, but just something all of a sudden feels weird. Whenever that happens, even if it's all of a sudden got hung up on weeds, set the hook. There's been more than a few times I've let it sit there too long and I move a little too far and all of a sudden I feel it spit it out. So anytime you feel something different, that's when you want to set the hook on it. But if you look at the tip on this rod, it bends pretty much all in the tip section first before it even gets into the mid part of the rod and loads up. The same thing is true, this is actually a St. Croix panfish rod. Same thing is true with the K&E whip bar. This was actually the first one that I saw that worked for this technique. There is one little drawback with this rod, but it's not a major one at all. It is a graphite butt section, but to get the action out of it and keep the cost down for guys, they've actually inserted a fiberglass tip so they can make it soft and yet very durable. It worked really well. When I got a hold of this rod, drop shotting became a everyday technique for me everywhere I went for panfish, deep and shallow. A year later, that rod came out, and that's my #1 rod now. But if I need 2 setups to bounce back and forth, I'll always have this one on the boat with me. The rods are just, it's one thing I can't stress enough with this technique. Getting the right rod makes a big difference. It's really the only technique I will do that and say that to customers and people that come here looking for advice. One thing you might also notice on my setup, this is a 1000 series reel. For most people that panfish, this is a very large reel. There's a couple reasons why I use this. For one, the arbor of the spool is a lot wider, which helps managing line a little bit better. Particularly because when I'm doing this technique, I'm fishing fluorocarbon line, which is inherently a little bit stiffer. The other thing is too, the spool is a little bit taller, which when you're casting these little bit stiffer lines or lighter baits, you want to get good distance out of it. It opens it up and lets the line come off the spool easier. You just have better line management in a hole. Another benefit to this, because I'm fishing 3-pound tests, especially here on this lake, you say you hook into a stray smallie or a largemouth, which will happen. With a larger spool like this, you actually have a larger drag washer inside there, which gives you a couple benefits. You have more surface area, so any heat that might build up, it goes away really quick, but it also gives you more drag pressure available to you. So the combination of the 1000 size reel, a 7-foot or a 6'6" rod, really helps protect the line and allows you to fish these really light lines for these big panfish. I was out 2-3 days ago before all this craziness happened. It was one of the warm days. I caught 3 or 4 largemouth that were 4 pounds on this setup with no issue. So this is my new baby reel, by the way. I just got it. It's pretty sweet. I've massively upgraded in their lineup, but any of the 1000 series or anything comparable in size, whatever brand you prefer to fish with, Daiwa, Fluger, Okuma, Abu Garcia, but this is the Shimano I use. That's my setup, and that's kind of the premise of the technique. Does anybody have any questions on that?
On your retrieve, at what point do you reel in besides just letting you sit there and like?
It kind of depends on the day. Like lately, the water's been so clear that the fish have been a little boat shy. They want to stay a little bit further away from the boat. So I'm reeling in when I get about where I can start seeing the bait. I'll pull it up if I don't see anything behind it. If I have a little stained color to the water, I'm reeling it all the way up to my feet, and then I'm bringing it up. I'll give it a little bit, and I'll bring it up. If you're fortunate enough to have electronics that can view right below, like a flasher or some of the nicer electronics that are out there, and you can see your bait on your graph, leave it down there and look for something chasing it and following it in. I was talking with a pro out of South Carolina the other day in here, and he was talking about drop shotting because they don't do a lot of it down south. And he was fishing up on the St. Clair River doing the technique, and he saw something follow his bait up, but then go right back down. It was still on his graph. He dropped back down to it and was doing the textbook drop shot vertically and caught the fish. So I mean, if you have electronics, definitely pay attention to them as you bring your bait up. Just kind of glance at it. But generally, when it's really cleared and they're boat shy, about a third of the way in is when I start just reeling in and recast. If I'm fishing fairly deep water, it never really comes up. It stays down the entire time, and I just move around on a drift. So, anything else?
The knot has to be tight, or the hook has to be hooked up.
Yes. When you tie this hook on, I was going to get to that when I got into the hooks a little bit. There's a knot called a Palomar knot. How many of you are familiar with that? Good. If you're not, I'll be happy to show you up here afterwards. It's a little hard to show. But a Palomar knot, the idea is, the Palomar knot is probably one of the strongest knots you can have in fishing, no matter what type of line it is. It's my go-to for everything: braid, fluorocarbon, mono, the Palomar. The nice thing about fluorocarbon is, for a Palomar knot, there's a big long tag in. We usually cut off and throw in the garbage. What's nice about drop shotting, you tie that long tag in, you just attach your weight to it. When I'm attaching the hook, you use the Palomar knot. There's a couple options for hooks depending on the baits you use. One that's really helped a lot of the customers that come in here that just struggle learning new knots or tying a lot of knots and stuff like that sometimes, is a product called it's from VMC, it's called the Spin Shot. I'll send one around the room. The Spin Shot basically has a wire that's like a swivel, and you attach your main line onto the top, and you just take a section of line and attach it to the bottom. And it's helped a lot of people rig the drop shot, because a couple problems with a drop shot rig that you may find out if you're tying direct is line twist. When you're reeling it up, the bait will want to kind of helicopter in the way up. So sometimes you got to kind of watch for line twists as you're fishing with, especially on really windy days. You'll have to retie a few times for that. But also, what's nice about this is you're fishing in current, that bait will always be dead on perfect in the current, looking nose up, which is a good thing. Sometimes these drop shot weights, the swivels on them aren't the greatest, so they don't spin as easy, so sometimes that weight will spin the hook and change the side of it a little bit. So if there's any type of current, that Spin Shot will keep it in check a little bit. If you're confident in your knot tying ability and able to get that hook to always go upright, there's a couple little tricks if you don't get to go upright you can do to save the day, not have to cut and retie and try to who knows how many more times. But what you'll notice, the Spin Shot and this one are a little bit different, but not by much. But you'll notice this is a unique hook. It's kind of got an octopus look to it and a little bit of Aberdeen, but it's a shorter shank hook. With this technique, you don't really need a long shank hook for the sake of them eating it so deep. Because usually because the line is here, it stops them from getting super, super deep. So most of the time it's within reach of like a forcep, you can get it out really easily. But if you look really closely, they'll take a close look at the eye on this one. If you put it flat level, it's just angled down just slightly. Now the only other hook I use for drop shotting is an Aberdeen. And the reason I use the Aberdeen is for really large, long plastics that have a good sized body to it. most fishermen know what an Aberdeen is, even if they don't know the name. If you buy those Snells for perch fishing, that's an Aberdeen hook. They come in an extra long shank and a standard shank. For drop shotting purposes, I'll use the standard shank, and that's what this one is here. And some of the plastics with that Aberdeen I'll use on it. There's one from a company, by the name of J&S. Been using Jeremy's stuff for a long time. There's a bait called the Ice Mite Magnum and a Gojo Magnum. Both baits are fairly large in a panfish sense. But perch, really like them. We'll definitely eat them a lot. If you're familiar with a lot of the bass baits, it kind of has some resemblance of it. It's just a straight worm, but the ball that's on the end here actually keeps the tail unstable, so it always moves even at the slightest movement. And a lot of times with drop shotting, especially here in the big water, you don't have to move that rod, just let the waves do it for you. But this bait always wants to move. You can see it just sitting in here, just from me talking, it starts to vibrate on its own. So that's a really good drop shot bait. That was actually one of the very first ones I tried. First lake I drop shotted on was Bruin Lake over in Pinckney Rec area. I caught my first summertime perch in that lake ever. I think I was going there 4 years straight and I couldn't catch one. Tried drop shotting, started catching them. Some other ones, if you're in here a lot or you see my post online or happen to catch a couple of the videos I made last year, is Candy Plastics. With any type of drop shotting baits, you want something that's really soft and supple so it gets a lot of action. And to get that, most of the time you have to go to hand poured plastics. Candy Plastics, they're generally a minnow style bait. They have big buggy eyes and just some really sweet colors on them. Keith does an awesome job. These are all hand poured, hand dipped, one at a time, him and his wife. It's really a labor of love. I don't know how they make money doing this, because all the bass guys say no way would I ever make these. And those guys make some gorgeous stuff too. So, but these are pretty cool. The one I'm passing around is the Stb Grub. It's a little 1 3/4 inch bait. One of my other favorites to drop shot is the Munchie, which is just a little bit more of a roly-poly kind of condensed version of that one. Which leads me into some new stuff that's just now hitting the market. Thanks to ice fishing becoming as popular as it is, we're getting high quality panfish plastics, even from the larger companies now. Northland has some good ones in the Impulse lineup that will help you out. Trigger X, which is a Rapala company, we actually are fortunate. We were the first one in the country to get this lineup from them, so it's pretty cool. These baits will do well during ice season, but they have some shapes that I think are going to imitate a lot more insect for us. Mayfly larvae, dragonfly nymphs, you know, just the little bugs that live in the weed beds. So it's going to be a little more of a buggy type series versus the minnow stuff, but they do have some minnow baits too. But one thing you'll notice is just how soft and supple these are. And they did a pretty good job doing that with these. I have got a chance to fish them a little bit. Did catch fish, only had like 2 or 3, so they disappeared quickly. But some of my favorites are still Candy Plastics day in, day out here. They really, really perform well, but I will hopefully fish with these a lot more this fall and going into the winter. But they are definitely worth a look if you're trying to figure out some baits that you want to try for this. Another bait that's every pan fisherman knows is a basic crappie tube, the little 1.5 to 2 incher. I think everybody that pan fishes has probably at least bought one package in their life sometime, and I'm going to guess it's probably a red and chartreuse if you crappie fish. And if you live here, it's probably something with brown on it. Definitely, if you got those and you're just sitting there and you haven't never caught a fish on them, try them. Just nose hook them. Those tentacles will just kind of breathe and move really good in the water. Cool thing about tubes is they'll get that air stuck inside them sometimes, and they'll sit up like this, which to a fish looks like a crawfish just kind of hovering there. And a lot of people don't think bluegill eat crawfish. My best bluegill day on private land, this was though, We were using little crawfish this big. It ran out. Started throwing tubes. It was just as good as the live bait. And we were catching literally 12-inch hybrids. So that was a pretty cool day. So I mean, yeah, the whole idea behind their baits is think like you do for bass, but downsize it. There's minnow shapes, there's worms, there's buggy objects, you know, kind of like beavers and creature baits that we use for bass fishing, the same kind of idea there. Drop shot weights is another pretty important component of this. They come in two basic shapes, a round and a cylinder. For this lake in particular, especially this time of the year, you're going to want to focus on the cylinder weights. And the main reason being is they're going to pull through the weeds a lot easier for you. It's a nice smaller profile, they won't get hung up as much. Especially if you're using really light line, you might get in some really matted weeds and you think you're going to break your line just trying to free it from the weeds sometimes. But again, that's where that special clip comes from, and it helps out. Now, drop shot weights are now coming in two types of material. There's the classic lead that we all grew up using, and if you've been hip to the new age ice fishing scene, tungsten. Nice thing about tungsten is it's very heavy but a very small profile. So if you're flipping up to some docks and the fish seem to be a little skittish and you can see them every time that weight hits the water, they kind of spook off and you got to let it sit there a little longer to get them to come back. Try going to a tungsten weight that's comparable to what your lead weight was, and that smaller profile goes in the water a lot quieter, and sometimes that's going to help you get a few more strikes just because of that reason alone. But if you're fishing around rock, because of how dense tungsten is, it seems that you can basically feel the bottom a little bit better. It feels like it's thumping a little bit harder than what the lead is, because lead's kind of soft. It doesn't transmit vibration as well as tungsten does. So I'll pass around the round ball, which is generally used on open conditions, rocky areas, and the cylinder definitely on weedy areas, which most of this lake is weeds right now. So, and take close attention to the clip that's on here. You'll see where the opening is, and as you pull the line through, it'll just split right open. You can use split shots and any other weight you want, but the drop shot weights, for some reason, I just always use them now. When I was laid off, I used a lot of split shots just because they were cheap. You get $2, you get a whole big bag of them. But the problem is they come off way too easy. I was casting them off, so I sat down and did some math one night, and it wasn't saving me any money. So, which is kind of heartbreaking.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are they all standard size?
They'll come in anywhere from an 1/8 ounce to an ounce. You can get drop shot weights for pan fishing. 1/8, 3/16, 3/8 and quarters will be the bulk of what you'll use.
What's your preferred?
Depends on the conditions. If I'm flipping around docks and break walls where it's not too rough, I'm not dealing with a whole bunch of current, I'll throw an 1/8 ounce most of the time. 3/16 used to be my bread and butter, but with these fish here, I've gone to a little bit smaller weight just to be a little quieter going in. So the next part of this equation is the line. There's two schools of thought on this line, and it depends where you're at in the country on drop shotting in general. Doesn't matter if it's for bluegill, bass, walleye, whatever you're doing it for. We have a lot of guys that come from down south that want the extra sensitivity because they're not too adept to finesse fishing. So they'll go to braided lines or super lines that have no stretch. There is a few that I have used for that on dirtier lakes. And I'm fishing like 30, 40 feet of water for deep summertime bluegill. I'll go to a braid sometimes just to get a little more sensitivity out of the presentation. Power Pro makes 5 and 3 pound now. They're basically the same diameter, but a little bit different breaking strength, but they're really fine. There's no stretch, so again, that helps you with sensitivity. And another one that's fairly new is NanoFill. Some people like it, some people hate it, just kind of like Fireline and all the other braids. There's fans of everything. What's cool about NanoFill, and especially for pan fishermen, is that this line will do double duty for you, not just for deep water drop shotting, but the other thing I use it for a lot is for throwing weightless plastics, which I covered last October a little bit, which is something not a lot of guys do for panfish. Just like fishing soft plastic fluke baits, same exact idea. But with this bait, with this line, it's really, really slick stuff. When I did head-to-head testing of it with comparable diameters, I got, I think it was about 15 feet more in casting distance between that and a regular Power Pro. And that was throwing a 64th ounce jig into the wind. So that was pretty cool. That was the first time I casted. I went out in the field and casted it, had a tape measure, a 100-foot tape measure, and I blew past the 100-foot tape measure on one of the casts. I was like, that's cool. So both are really good choices if you're fishing really deep water. If you're fishing really clean deep water, and you want the extra sensitivity to braid, make sure you put a fluorocarbon leader on there. Generally anywhere from 3 to 6 feet is what a lot of guys do. If you're doing leaders, you're going to have to put a different leader on throughout the day because you're end up changing it, breaking stuff off, and cutting, and eventually you're going to shorten it so much that you're at the wrong height, and you need to pull a new leader on there. So a little bit of drawback there. You got to tie another knot into the system. The way I prefer to fish it most of the time when I'm fishing out here is fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is basically a line that reflects light similar to water. Best way to kind of describe it to you is in the heat of the summer, if you're looking across a roadway, it kind of has that quivering mirage look to it. That's basically what fluorocarbon looks like in the water to the fish. From what I understand, and when I see it through the water, that's what it kind of looks like to me, so that's my thought on that. So it's not totally invisible, but probably as close as you're going to get with anything that's man-made. When fluorocarbon first came out, it was really stiff, kind of hard to deal with, but companies like Suffix, Sunline, Seagar, P-Line, they've all done a great job making very, very good lines. There's two brands that I personally fish with a lot, the Suffix and Visicast. This one is the 3-pound, which is what's on that setup right there right now. It's a really nice handling line. It's not the most expensive out there, so it does save you a few bucks, but it's a good line. Another one that I use a lot on my bass setups is Sunline Sniper FC. They do make it in 5 and 3-pound. I'm out of the 5-pound right now. I got to order some more. Somebody came in and cleaned me out yesterday. But this is the 8-pound spool. If you go up and start shopping for lines in general, don't look at the inch, don't look at the pounds. You want to look at the millimeters of the line, and you compare them that way. So if this line is 10-pound test and this line is 10-pound test, look at the millimeters. They'll tell you which one's the strongest to diameter ratio out of it. So if you got a line, in the case of Sunline Supernatural, the 16-pound test is the same as 10-pound XT. So you can actually bump up the strength, keep your suppleness, but also have the right diameter for the presentation. So when you shop for lines, look at that. It's really important. It's something a lot of guys don't do because they have the inch diameter on there and the millimeter. Inch diameter is too crude. There's a bunch of stuff missing. So when you go to the millimeter, it's a little more precise. You can gauge it a little bit better.
On the Sunline,
Yeah.
What would you use on as far as for panfish?
For panfish,
Yeah.
5 or 3-pound is what I use.
Okay.
I like to fish as light as I possibly can. Out here, it's a little scary sometimes fishing 3-pound tests. There's a lot of bass out here that will kick your butt on 3-pound tests sometimes.
Yeah.
Especially
What about-
going into the
what
fall.
about 4 bass? What line do you?
I'm very comfortable with 8-pound. If I was in a tournament setting, I might go up to 10, just for a little extra
fun
cushion.
fishing, be 8-pound.
Yeah, for fun fishing, 8. I mean, if I really want to have fun, I'll throw a 6 on. It just depends on my mood that day and if I have it laying around. So, any questions on the line, hooks?
Does it matter the diameter with those slip weights? Do some make it fall off easier?
Yes. The lighter you go in line with these clips, because there's only one size now, you will have a few more weights lost just from getting hung up and coming off easier with like the 3-pound. The 5 pound knot I haven't really noticed is any more than with like 6 or 8 pound. But also the brand of the clip will dictate that a little bit too. And unfortunately, we don't get to see who makes these clips. They're just on the weights. So they're all coming out of China for the most part. So it is what it is on those.
If you put a loop through it, if you tie a loop, put it through and pull it up so you get 2 pieces of line through, does it help at all? Or not?
It's going to open up the clip a little more. Probably the best way to help that, if you're having a problem with that, is just tie a overhand knot so that it stops in that knot. And the odds are then it's actually going to cut through that line eventually. So that's one way to help. I know there's quite a few bass guys, they'll get a bad batch of clips. They start doing that and they stop losing the weights. It happens every now and again, but anything else? Am I doing that good of a job? Or am I going too fast?
You're not gonna get any coffee.
Perch fishing with this process also?
Yes, perch are panfish in my book. So I know a lot of people separate them out because they're related to walleye. They fit in a pan. They're a panfish. So, the nice thing about drop shotting for perch is you can use a lot larger bait than you do for bluegill. Same with crappie because of the size of their mouth. You can use some bigger baits. You can actually use some of those 3-inch minnow baits that you use for bass and catch some very nice perch on this lake. There's a couple spots in the spring that if you were here, I think it was last spring, Baylog was in here talking about fishing tubes. He was talking about bass fishing actually, but he kind of got off on a tangent and brought up perch. Over by the firecracker, there's this little area. And if you don't throw a 4-inch tube, he claims, you don't catch perch. And they're big. They're 14s and 15s. This is what he said in the seminar. I have it on tape. So, it's perch. I mean, if you look at some of the minnows some of these guys want to use, they're 3 and 4 inches. So why not throw a 3 and 4 inch bait out of plastics? So
The nanofill, is that a braid?
nanofill is a breed of its own. The best way I can describe nanofill, well, I gotta go step back here for a second. All braids are made out of 2 materials, Spectra and Dyneema. Depending on the brand, which one they use. Nanofill, Fireline, and most of the Berkeley braids are all made out of Dyneema. Dyneema, it's a great material, but what they do different with Nanofill versus a braid, it's really not braided at all. They're taking really tiny, tiny filaments of the Dyneema, basically nano size. I don't know what the measurement is, but it's really tiny. And through a fusion process, they're basically bonding it together. And it's making it all one lines. And they extrude it just like they do monos in fluorocarbons and copolymers. And if you've ever got a chance to see some of the shows over the past years that have gone to these line factories, all your lines start out with like little pellets. They're melted down, then put through like rollers and extruding. It just extrudes it out, fills it on a spool, and that's your fishing line. That's all it is. Nanofill is basically that same process, all intents and purposes. I've never seen the process yet. They won't tell anybody exactly how they do it. But it's just one solid strand of a bunch of tiny fibers of Dyneema melted together. If you're looking at the basic Fireline crystal, it's short strands of regular sized Dyneema fused together. So if you ever fish it and you see like that banana peeling thing happening, that's because that strand, it caught an edge and it's starting to roll off and you can peel it right off. That's just how that Fireline's always been made. That's why some people hate it and some people like it. So, anything else?
You only mentioned using plastics.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use live bait?
Yes. I actually recommend it if you're struggling to see if there's fish there. Throw a minnow on, throw a worm on. Doesn't hurt to check it with live bait or to find fish with live bait. Then if you get them going really good, throw plastics down. It took me a little while to get comfortable throwing plastics all the time for panfish. I grew up, you go bluegill, you go perch fishing, worms and minnows. All you need. And a bunch of other beads and blades and stuff on the line above them. But when I got fishing the ice fishing tournaments, you get your butt beat by somebody fishing plastics, you're gonna try to figure out how to catch fish on plastics through the ice, and that's where it's kind of snowballed into drop shotting. If we can do it in the middle of winter, There's no reason why we can do it when they're more active this time of the year. There's no reason at all why you can't do it. The problem with plastics is you have to figure out the shape, the action, and the color that they're wanting. But none of that matters until you're presenting the bait properly. I'm a pretty firm believer, if you are presenting the bait perfectly, the way they want it presented, it doesn't matter what the shape or color is, you're gonna catch some fish. At that point, you just gotta dial it in. I preach that with walleye fishing a ton in here. When you're trolling, if you're not at the right depth, the right speed, color doesn't matter. Don't worry about it until you get that right. And then you start playing with blade colors and bead colors. Same thing with fishing plastics. Once you get in the right depth range where you're with the weight and the hook separation distance, once you get that right for what they're wanting, where they're comfortable eating that bait, you can throw a variety of different types of plastics at them, and they'll all bite it. I have my favorites, just like everybody else. We get conditioned to, this is my go-to bait. I'm a victim of that, just like any other fisherman. I got baits that if I can't catch fish, I'll put them on. I'll start catching them. I'll change back. I still don't catch them. But the guy next to me is still catching them on the color we started with. It's like that in Senkos for me. I can't catch fish on Senkos.
You didn't mention how long
The distance between the two? The distance between the hook and the weight is going to vary depending on where you're fishing. If I'm fishing around docks, it's anywhere from 6 to 12 inches most of the time, unless I got some heavy weeds there. Then I'll go a little bit taller. If I'm out on the lake and I'm fishing perch grass, which is that drill pad looking grass that looks like bottom, but all of a sudden, something just sinks right through it, you're like, what the heck? And you're bringing it out and all of a sudden a 14-inch perch comes out of it with it. That's perch grass. That stuff there, I like to set that bait right at the tops of it. So it just, every once in a while I might get hung up on it. If I'm fishing cabbage or milfoil beds or sandgrass, which is that long skinny stuff you always see floating around out here, thanks to the guys in Muscatine running around every weekend. That type of grass, you can see where it's kind of folding over. I usually, depending on the fish's mood, I'll get just underneath the main canopy or just above it. I don't try to pull right through the thickest part. It's never a good situation. So just play with it. For bass, I generally start about 18 inches to 12, somewhere in that ballpark. For panfish, I go a little bit closer to the bottom most of the time. I had one instance though where I had to have a 6-foot lead. That was thanks to my electronics. I could see that. We were fishing them. We would get them come off the bottom as the bait went down. And they would get up 6 foot and stay, and the bait went past them. And they wouldn't bite. We were like, what the heck? So we kept going longer and longer and longer, and all of a sudden, literally the length of our rod, we started catching fish. So,
Can you use the tag? Can you leave, leave an 18-inch tag and then you slide your thing up?
yep. A lot of times if I'm going to a body of water or I haven't been out in the lake in a while, and I'm going to be bouncing around from place to place trying to get their temperature, try to figure out where they're at, I'll tie it a little long until I start catching fish, and then I'll get rid of it. Especially in the algae infested areas, algae will attach to that little tag in and just drag around like an extra weight. It just gets annoying. It's not that it's hurting anything, it just gets in the way and it's annoying. But I've been out bass fishing and had like 12 inches off of my lead before I figured out they wanted it this close to the bottom. So, and that was a goby bite though too. So.
With these spin rigs,
The spin shots?
spin shots. Now with that St. Croix rod,
Mm-hmm.
if you went with the Power Pro 3 to 5 pound, and then you just tie a drop for your line, what's the drawback to it? Any? I mean, now you're going to have some pretty good line for sensitivity,
Yep.
but what are you giving up?
The naturalness of the presentation in clear water in some instances. That's where that fluorocarbon comes in handy. It kind of blends into the surroundings.
So you're
It's
just
not
tying
there.
the whole spool with your fluorocarbon.
Yeah, I fill the whole thing. If I got a spool line that's only 100 yards of carbon, I'll throw some mono on there
No.
just to fill the space up.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to short fill any reel out there. It's not going to perform well for you. It doesn't matter what brand, what style it is. You want to fill them up all the way. You're going to get a lot better performance.
So
out
you
of
go
it.
with the back, even on that 1,000?
Yeah, I actually I do have some backing on there. I have some old ice line I threw on there. I have no clue what pound it is. I just took one. I had like a little tiny micro reel that was sitting in the closet from 12 years ago. I still had line. I just threw that on there really quick, put everything on there. It didn't fill it up enough, so I just went ahead and put the 100 yards of the fluorocarbon on from the spool. So, did I forget anything? Line, baits, hooks, weights. I think that's about it. The one thing I want to make sure I stress, it's not about the baits, it's not about the hooks, it's not about the weights. It's about how you fish this rig. A lot of people that come in here that have tried this rig and they come back, I just can't catch fish on this, Justin. I ask them, what are they doing? I'm doing exactly like you said. I said, show me. I see them in the store using my rod, they're hopping it. I said, that's your problem right there. Keep that weight connected to the bottom. I cannot stress that enough. That will make or break this technique most days for you. There's days it works. On days that the hopping's working, throw a jig on and just fish a jig and hop it off the bottom. Save yourself an extra knot and some headache of trying to rig stuff up. Which then you can change up baits, you can go to bigger stuff. The fall rate's gonna be different then too, so. But, is there anything anybody wanted to see demoed really quick, or? No?
You're fishing perch out in 15, 16 feet of water, you throw it out?
Yes and no.
Great answer.
I'm not making super long casts. I'm just kind of pitching out to the side and just kind of dragging it and back to the boat. When I have flat dead calm water, I am jigging the rod very slightly. You're not doing like a walleye jig. You're almost shaking that rod tip. That's all you're doing. Just kind of trying to think of a description that would work other than
It's almost like pounding an ice jig in a way.
shaking a pom-pom, but not very hard. Okay? We're not too enthusiastic for our team. Kind of thing. So just nice and soft. A little goes a long ways. If you're not sure if you're going too hard or too soft, make a short rig, drop it in a fish tank, a bucket, a clear Tupperware container. Your wife, girlfriend might get really ticked off at this. Put it in the living room, watch TV, and practice. Believe it or not, when I started fishing ice fishing tournaments, I had a 5-gallon pail between my legs, watching TV. I practiced for hours jigging. That's how I learned how to have a nice subtle touch with the rod and make getting subtle movements out of it. Practice makes perfect in everything we do in life. It doesn't matter what it is. Even if you can't go fishing, you can still practice this technique, which is great. You can't practice locating fish, you can't practice doing color selection, but you can practice fishing the presentation. So, us ice fishermen are crazy. We do stupid stuff like that sometimes.
Instead of block lights.
Anything else? Tonight is a twofer, by the way. I don't know how many of you guys saw it on the forum. John's going to be doing a little talking. What's the official topic other than...
Positioning for success, but you ended it really well because you said locating. So that's kind of where I'll pick up.
Okay. Do you need anything left up here?
You can leave it all up there, okay?
When he's done, if you want to see how the knot's done and all that, I'll be happy to demo a million times if I have to.
What's the cheaper?